I'd like to give a shout out now to Rabbi Shimshon HaKohen Nidel. You've probably seen his writings. He's quite prolific and scholarly and encyclopedic. He's been writing a column for the Torah Tidbits that's put out by the OU here in Israel, and now it's in the Jewish press, and it's quite good. He has quite an archive of previous articles. I first became involved with him 7 years ago, and it's very good. I'm glad to say that he considers me a friend. I consider him a friend, but it's more of an honor for me that he would consider me a friend. And he's written something very nice. You go check this out about the whole idea of Pidyon Shvuyim. And I take no issue with anything he's expressed there. He's done a good job of presenting the facts and the arguments. I also think that he's actually done quite a good job at evading, not in a bad way, but preventing himself from expressing any of his own opinions, not getting involved in that, not taking it personally, which is a good thing. Some of us have a problem that when we get too excited about a particular halachic stance, we take it very personally, and perhaps we even disrespect others' opinions. So he's done a good job of being impartial. His neutrality is very good, and his presentation is quite good. So I recommend you look at things he's written on these matters. But I'd like to present some of my thoughts on this based on things that I just heard this week, actually, things that you could hear from others. As another shout out again to Rabbi Sharkey, who just today said something that I think is relevant to the current discussion and echoes something that Rabbi Bar-Hayim said earlier this week. So if you missed it, we will get to it. And that is, there is a basic psak, which is explicit in the Mishnah, right there in Parak HaSholeach. And it says that we're not supposed to redeem captives for more than they're worth, for whatever it is. And the Gemara there basically concludes that the reason is so that this doesn't become a form of extortion for the Jewish people. If those who are taken captives realize that you get good money for Jewish captives, so they will go take more. It just emboldens them. We want to discourage them and show them that we're not going to pay more than, let's say, the market value of that particular person on the slave market, which is, by the way, what most captive takers would do. It was a business. It was a business because it's quite good. People want to redeem their loved ones, or you could take slaves and sell them in some foreign country, and it's quite an investment, for at least for those who are buying the slaves. So this was a fact of life throughout most of Jewish history, and even if today many have acknowledged there isn't a slave market, it's hard to evaluate how much you'd find, how much someone would go for based on his age and his physical condition, his whether he's a man or a woman. That would depend on all these factors, what someone would invest in a slave. But there is a way to calculate. Unfortunately, there still are slaves somewhere in the world. Okay, that's what they used to do. And it seems to me that that is what is brought explicitly by the Rambam, for example, and the Shulchan Aruch. We should take note that the major decisors did not involve themselves in perhaps the Havaminas and the exceptions that are mentioned on the daf. For example, we're going to see some by the Tosafists, or perhaps some that could be derived, that could be inferred from other sources in the Talmud. The psak is pretty clear. By the way, if you find a clear psak in a Mishnah that's brought by the poskim, X, Y, Z, this is forbidden, whatever it is, and then you find, let's say, an early Tana, a sage of the Mishnah, who disagreed, and his actions show that he disagreed, that's very good. But perhaps that's just showing that this Tana was in the minority, and his opinion was already rejected. I'm surprised that for certain things that basically are not always relevant, things that don't come up that often, or things that have been basically, like we said last week, in hibernation. Rav Kook was talking about running a Jewish state, and all the relevant halachas have been in hibernation so long, they've gone into disuse that poskim just ignore them entirely. Then when it comes to major decisions about how we should be running our state, prosecuting our wars, etc., they're unaware of these issues that have already been addressed and already been decided explicitly by precedent. Okay, so that's a problem. In Gittin 58a, Rabbi Nadel mentioned this. You go find the Tosfos there. We have the story of Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, who redeemed a young Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha. Apparently, he was somewhere abroad. I think it's in Rome, if I'm not mistaken. Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha apparently became a Kohen Gadol later in life, but also was around during the time of the Churban, and his own children eventually were taken into captivity also. And it says that Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania was aware of this child, apparently very good-looking child and also very sharp, was being imprisoned, or perhaps due to be sold. And Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania made the determination that he would redeem this child for whatever price. That's the quote there. And he did redeem him for what the Gemara describes as mamon harbe, a lot of money. Now, Tosfos there asks the question, doesn't this contradict the Mishnaic rule of a few daf beforehand? I think it's on 45, where we have this, that you're not supposed to redeem get there al demehem, more than actually they're worth. So the Tosfos gives a few answers there, a few proposed answers. And the answer, the first one is Sakanos Nefashos. This kid was actually in some sort of life-threatening situation, so it warranted paying more. Or it's because he was muflag b'chokhmah, an exception made for a child who was an obvious prodigy and would become a great sage. Unfortunately, the Mishnah never made such distinctions. And we could also give another answer, by the way. When it says Momon Harbe and Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania's decision to pay whatever price for this child, let's think about that for a minute. Has anybody here ever bought a slave? Or has anybody here ever been involved in ordinary pinyon shvuyim? You ever notice that most people, unless you were fantastically rich, you didn't have many slaves? And let's say just because of our own personal experience, historical experience, in the American South where they had slavery, that was one of the last places in the Western world where it persisted. Did you notice that it wasn't that everybody who had many slaves, only rich plantation owners, for example, had that. Someone had a slave, they had one slave. It's like buying a car or a house, a major investment. Most people don't buy more than, let's say, one per person. People who own multiple houses, thank God, are doing quite well. People who own a man who has more than two automobiles, one from his wife, one for himself, and then he has a few more. So that's considered doing quite well. So we have this concept that if he made this determination to rescue this child for Mamon Harbe, it does not necessarily mean that he was paying more than the market value. Him on his own, yes, that's Mamon Harbe. He's going to pay a lot to redeem this child. The child is a good investment in a slave. Let's say if he's 10 years old, he has all his good years ahead of him. That's why when we have an actual case today of Pidyon Shvuyim, what happens? You have to make a fund for them. You appeal to other people. If one person would say, I'll take it upon myself to redeem this captive, that's the last captive he's redeeming for the rest of his life. It's a major investment, unless he's quite wealthy. And even the wealthy people will say, yes, I'll redeem every captive around. Maybe there are some people, thank God, who can do that. People give millions to charity, thank God. But not all of us can do such a thing. So Pidyon Shavuyim, whoever said that the market value itself isn't Mamon Harbe, that's the first thing. Secondly, you see that for himself, this was something that perhaps was quite relative. That is, it was subjective. To him, Momon Harbe is a lot of money for himself, but perhaps for another person, it would have been easier. So I think that Tosfos' question doesn't even get off the ground, which is why, for example, Maimonides and the Shulchan Aruch were not bothered by such a thing, by not bringing, and others when they don't bring this exception. So let's see some more rebuttals to this. Also, this is a midrashic teaching. This is a story. This is not necessarily something that the sages bring in order to tell us halacha l'maisa concerning the value of, or how much we should be paying to redeem captives. There, in context, it's talking about heartbreaking stories concerning the destruction of the Second Temple and the end of the Second Commonwealth. That's the point of the story. That's what means Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha, Kohen Gadol, his origins as a child captive, and what eventually happened to his own children. But it does not necessarily mean that this halacha l'maisa, Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania is teaching us that when you have a prodigy such as Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol, you're supposed to spend a lot more on Pidyon Shvuyim. Let's see what else. Okay, let's see another thing. By the way, has anybody here prepared to buy a slave sight unseen? Okay, we're not used to doing such a thing. So yeah, that goes back to the first argument we made. Other exceptions that you might be able to derive from the Gemara, I think, are basically Havaminas, a lot of them. And this is not we can't go into every single example. Gittin, let's go back to Daf Mem Heom and Aleph. There it says that the reason for Tzakana is to protect Jewish people from further kidnappings, and so that the Gentiles don't start extorting us. That's important, extorting more money from us, and we can't. And that's the conclusion. Although there's a Havamina there that some run with, that an individual is not bound. What the Mishnah is describing is public policy for the community, the public. But an individual who's wealthy can redeem himself or his close relatives for whatever amount he chooses. And it seems that the Gemara actually is not conclusive about that. And the Gemara almost, I think that an important interpretation there, which is I think the Maimonidean one, is that really we can't stop individuals from being, let's say, foolish sometimes. Yes, they're going to pay for themselves a lot more because they have the cash, and if they want to do that, that's fine. But we can't stop them. But lichatchila, we should tell them you can't do this. But the Chazal look at most of these halachic questions and look at what the Beit Din, the halachically acceptable, authoritative group that is supposed to make decisions for the tzibur would do, and that's whom they're directing. They can't tell every individual, yes, don't redeem, don't ransom your close relatives for more than their value. They get emotional about it. But they could tell you, you shouldn't, but it's not like we can walk in and stop them. And this is the way it's with a lot of other Averos. We're told, here's what the Torah says. We don't have the power to, let's say, go into people's houses every day. Now, let's say on Shabbos, we can't walk into someone's basement to make sure not everybody's just lighting a match to be Michal Shabbos, just like we can't totally control Gilui Rayos behind closed doors. The most we can do is just make sure to educate people and prevent public gatherings for the sake of Gilui Rayos. And that's a very important point that most people miss. We were talking about the rule of law last week. It's not like we're trying to go coerce everybody and use physical force to prevent major sins. We're trying to create a society that doesn't allow for such things. Let's see. This is Rabbi Bar-Hayim's major argument, and also one that Rav Sharkey made. Redeeming captives, as discussed in the Mishnah, was not from those who are engaged in active war with us. This one should be pointed out to everybody. And this is saying that, let's say, major poskim of the 20th century ignored. When, let's say, Jews were taken captive, usually they were taken to some other country. The Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha example was somewhere in Europe, apparently in Rome, like I said. And a lot of other examples have that. Somewhere in the Greco-Roman world, Jews taken from Eretz Yisrael and picked up by Jews in the far-flung communities in what Chazal called Medinot Hayam, major population centers in the Mediterranean basin. But during an active war with the enemy, in a situation whereby giving the enemy what he is demanding for the captives just makes it harder for us to win the war. So this is something that's very important. I just got something about what I was just saying, Rabbi Bar-Hayim's discussion with Jonathan Pollard. Anybody see it? Hold on. Did anybody see it? We expect soldiers to go to war for Klal Yisrael. Why? Because the Klal comes first. Similarly, in our current situation, the overarching issue is the destruction of Klal Yisrael's existential enemies. Wow, this is what I'm saying. The hostages must tragically come second. This is heart-wrenching but true. This is the fundamental moral imperative. Any other approach is immoral. This is what the Torah and Halacha teach us. It's also what a rational assessment demands. Yes, most importantly, when you come to Halacha, you cannot bring in, for example, emotions. Emotions are not for deciding Halacha. That's the whole point. We're supposed to take this in dry matter. The fact that Torah and rational analysis concur is not serendipitous coincidence. That's very good. Even if it's nice and theoretical, here's the sixth argument we have for all these kulas against various kulas you might find for redeeming captives, especially in our situation. Even if this is nice and theoretical, the maisa, the folly of the heterim, the permissibility, has been thrown in our faces many times. Okay, the Lamad Davar Domeh, land for peace. I was discussing with someone many times. We've mentioned this. There were great scholars of the 20th century who believed that the land for peace deal. I think Rabbi Soloveitchik famously felt this way. Rabbi Avi Grossman, when it came to the question of handing over territory that's controlled by the state of Israel to the enemy in exchange for whatever promises, whatever it may be, nonsense. So they said it's not a halachic issue. Ask the generals, ask the experts about this thing. But that opinion ignored the halachic imperative to wage war for the sake of controlling Eretz Yisrael, and that we're actually supposed to engage in a war. By the way, there's no such thing really, unless you have, let's say, a Moses leading you. There's no such thing as a war without casualties on our side. People are going to die in combat, but we are instructed to put ourselves into a situation of clear and present danger in order to control the land of Israel, gain back the territory or protect the territory. So, of course, land for peace is not something that overrides what they call pikuach nefesh. Pikuach nefesh comes in with regards to ritual sins, Shabbos, kashrus, even avodah zarah sometimes, which, by the way, doesn't override it in many cases. But for milchemes mitzvah, you can't say, well, pikuach nefesh, therefore no milchemes mitzvah. That doesn't make any sense. So we see that there's a folly. Even if we couldn't make this logical halachic argument, we see that land for peace is foolish because the proposal is if we do X, it will result in Y, and we keep seeing nope, it results in bloodshed, not Y, whatever Y was supposed to be. So too, redeeming captives for much more than their slave market value has repeatedly been shown to be foolish, even if you could find rabbis from the 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s, even today, making what sound like rational halachic arguments. The Mitzias has shown that it's wrong. That's all. It's just wrong. And by the way, this goes back to something that I was trying to say before we went live just now. You could show me what poskim say. You know, we would not have been in these situations if we had just followed the explicit psak that's in the Mishnah. It's in the Mishnah Torah. It's in the Shulchan Aruch. I'm surprised. There's some things are so eminently clear in the halacha. You have to be a real genius to be matar the sheretz. Tahir the sheretz means someone who is so sharp in talmudic thinking that he can make all sorts of arguments for the lizard, let's say, the dead lizard, to be halachically pure. So that shows that someone has prowess. It shows that he's sharp. It shows that he has the acumen and the ability to think. But he's not supposed to then go and say, you know what, I have all these cogent, matter of fact, amazing arguments for the sheretz being pure, and therefore I'm going to rule thusly. You can't do that. It's explicit. The sheretz is impure. Just because you can make all the arguments for purifying it, you have to know at the end of the day, get to the proper halacha conclusion that it is impure. There are certain things that are assumed. He brings Rabbi Shaul Yisraeli's argument that was individual melech hatchila pay more for himself. Now, I don't know if that's, like we said before, I don't know if that's assumed by halacha. Maybe that's just a havamina that's rejected by the halacha. Secondly, his argument was that the state is like an individual. The state, get this, or the government, as it may be, the state or the government, I don't know which one he was referring to, but in this case, they're almost interchangeable, is supposed to take care of its soldiers. So when the state has this situation, so the state can take care of itself and its soldiers, and then it's considered as a private individual. So I like to say that on the contrary, Adarabba, the state is the most tzibur there is. The state or the government, they represent the tzibur. So even if it's one of their soldiers who's been taken captive, we still have to view this in the light of the Mishnah. The tzibur is the one that has to bear the brunt of the decision, or actually bear the foolishness of the decision to redeem this captive for more than he's worth. So it's affecting the tzibur, and we don't look at the state and its soldiers as just individuals. I don't think that the assumption is correct. Next, this is the third argument against what's brought in Rabbi Shaul Yisraeli's name, is that the captive is not necessarily in sakana. You could say every captive is in sakana, or every captive isn't. To say that this captive is in more sakana than the others is quite strange. I think the only time you could say someone's really in sakana is if the Gentiles captors are actually saying, we intend to throw this man to the lions, make him engage in gladiatorial battles, like is mentioned in the Gemara there. Or they're actually saying, we intend to execute this person, in which case they're probably going to go ahead with what they say. You should know that when your enemies tell you they intend to kill you, they usually make good on their promises. So I wouldn't say that he's an amor sakana. Adarabba, this type of captive, a captured soldier, and these types of wars against the Amalekites and the Ishmaelites, they actually keep them better than regular captives. They use them as a bargaining chip because they know how foolish we are. And the sakana actually is us. We're in much greater sakana. It's been shown that the civilian populace, they're the ones who are put in danger because of these things. So I don't think Rav Yisraeli's arguments hold up today. Rav Halevi's arguments brought there. Here, it's also on the contrary to what he wrote there. The enemy knows how foolish we are, and we're not following the clear psak. They know exactly what we're doing. Okay, they have decided on this policy. They know what they're doing, so we can't say it. I'll review what he says here. Where is it? Sorry, I didn't put it on the screen. Here, I'll share this with everybody so they can see it. They'll know where to find what Rabbi Nadel wrote. I should have put this on the screen earlier. Here, you can find this on the Jewish Press's website. Here's Rabbi Nadel's byline. Did a good job. He probably has an oral shiur discussing this. So here's the argument. Let's see here. Here, Rabbi Chaim David Alevi, I think, was a chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, and then perhaps Israel also, of the last century, the mid-20th century. So he says here, these terror groups will always do all they can to harm Jews by all means possible, and there's no doubt that if they could, they would sacrifice themselves and kidnap soldiers and citizens every day in order to release their prisoners being held by Israel. So he uses this as an argument that releasing the prisoners doesn't pose any new, previously non-existent danger. They're still going to try to do it. They're trying to do it right now. So I think that this is actually an argument. The reason they're trying to do it because they know that this is the result. It's not that this is what's going to happen. So the premise is assumed. No, it's exactly opposite. If we would show strength, let's say like the halacha demands and Mr. Pollard has been demanding, that we actually execute the murderers of Jews or the attempted murderers of Jews, the enemy would be deterred. It's because we don't have deterrence. That's the problem with this argument over here. Sorry about that. He also added that if Israel's policy is not to redeem captive soldiers, this would be a devastating blow to our soldiers' morale and will cause soldiers to retreat rather than risk capture. The soldiers don't know that they're going to be redeemed, so it'll destroy their morale. Adarabba. There's nothing more that helps morale of the soldiers than to know that halacha is going to be followed. Not that we shouldn't tell the soldiers, don't worry, if you're captured, we'll be foolish enough, we'll give in to whatever they want, even to the extent that we'll make it easier for them to kill us in the future. You have to tell them, we are going to kill them. For every Jewish captive, every Jew captured or killed, we're going to kill 1,000 of them. That would be a deterrent, and that would greatly increase morale because it would make the bad guys stop. Strength is, I guess, invaluable, much more valuable than anything else over here. I think that what Rav Halevi wrote back then concerning this shows what the rabbi would call a completely exilic mindset. This is not the way, let's say, a King David or Yudah Maccabee or anybody in classic times would have related to the question. So I guess the conclusion is, when it comes to this question of redeeming the soldiers, we have to know there's pilpul, but there's actual halacha clarity. And we wouldn't have gotten to this mess if we could just stick to that which has already been ruled by the sages.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.